I saw that you had compositions with Patrick Stanford at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in the 1970s, and you received your first qualification in music in 2005. Please tell me more about your training and education in music composition.
Sure. I actually started much before I had lessons with Patrick. I was taught piano by my mother from the age of about 5. And after a couple of years of learning the basic techniques, read music and so on, I started to improvise at the piano. And I felt that music was coming to me somewhere, and I didn't know where, but I did a lot of improvising at that time. And it was very naive, you know, there was no direction or no understanding of contemporary music at that stage, because that wasn't in my family. And I only gradually I heard a few things and got involved with a few things where I was able to see that there was a new music scene, there was a new harmony and so on. And I started writing some of the ideas down when I was about 12. I had to learn how to write, but I was teaching myself most of the time, all the time actually. In my teens I joined a youth choir, and we were exposed to lots of new music of Britain, and we had even some folk songs that Bartok had arranged, so we were singing quite a lot of new music, Tippett. And I also, at that stage, started listening to a radio channel, being in the UK, being brought up there. We had the advantage of BBC Radio 3, which broadcast a tremendous amount of all the periods of music, from Renaissance right through the present day. And so I was focusing a lot on, at that stage, the last 50 years, you know, now last 100 or so years. And I learnt a lot because there was commentary on the pieces. So that was my education, initially. Self-taught and learning from the radio and from performing in the choir. And it was only until my 20s. I'd actually taken a physics degree by this time because I was advised, I was really too naive and too immature to take up a career in music at that stage. So my other interest was science and physics in particular, so I did a degree in that and pursued a career in electronic design engineering. But all the time I was writing music and exploring new music and so on, listening to music on the radio, going to concerts. Living close to London, I was able to go to the BBC Promenade concert series, and you know, that's an eye-opener as well. And eventually I joined the BBC Symphony Chorus, and that was contact with the professional world.
Yes. For
the first time. And I was, you know, wonderful conductors from Colin Davis, Andrew Davis, Roger Svensky, and of course Pierre Boulez. He was the chief conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra at that time. So we actually sat at the back of the orchestra and quite often saw Boulez performing Stockout, well, not Stockout at that time, but it was Schoenberg mainly, Webern, Stravinsky, Bartok, and so on. So we got a first-hand. Now I observed how he conducted, how he rehearsed during the, you know, before the concert. And it was such an eye-opener. It was a university education myself. I didn't need the university. Yes. I was just being educated how music works.
And that music was brand new at that time.
A lot of it was brand new. I mean, his own works were brand new, but I mean, Bartok and Webern were already dead, you know, but Stravinsky was still around. But I don't think he ever attended at that stage. I think he was too old. I don't know where he was at the time. No, he was in America, wasn't he, at that time? But yeah, it was an eye-opener. But after that, I did continue. I stopped the choir in my early 30s, and you know, because of personal circumstances, I had to move away. And it was only eventually that I took up. I was given the opportunity to take a master's degree. So rather than starting from scratch, you know, I went to almost the top and studied in Thames Valley University. And that actually gave me a lot of confidence because I passed with a distinction. And it gives me credibility as well as a composer.
And was that in composition?
In composition, yes, yes. Composing concert music, in fact. But there were other sectors that were, modules that were concentrating on film music and so on, but no, I was focusing on the concert music.
So you were very focused on improvising at the piano, and I'm curious to know, do you still compose through improvisation, or do you follow a different compositional approach at the moment?
Oh no, that was only in my early days, and now that I've got a composition technique, I don't need to improvise anymore. I write on Sibelius School Writer, and it goes, the music that comes through me goes straight onto that. Occasionally I might need to write ideas down on pencil, manuscript paper, but and sometimes try things out on a keyboard.
Of course.
You know, to work things out sometimes and to hear what the result. But you can hear the result on Sibelius, so you know that is the approach now.
Taking your own background as an autodidact in mind, to what extent do you think composition is an autodidactic practice?
Well, I think any art is autodidactic, because you can't teach how to write or to draw or to write music. You have to have it from somewhere inside you, or maybe even comes from outside. But so that is, it's self-taught, and that is what I understand to be autodidactic. But you do need lessons. I mean, from my point of view, I went to Patrick Stanford, as we discussed earlier, in order to learn the techniques, some of the practicalities, and some of how to present your music to performers and so on. And it's kind of put me on the initial road to getting performances and presenting my music in a better way, and actually pinpointing a few areas where it wasn't so good, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't teach composition. You can't teach somebody how to write a melody or harmony. It's got to come from within.
You write in your biography that your style is an individual one. How important is it to you to have a unique individual style?
I think these days it is important because music has diverged in style since the beginning of the 19th century even. Before that, there was more uniformity of style in the classical period, Baroque and so on. But composers started to be individual from Beethoven onwards. And by the time we get to the 20th century, as we know, the music has become extremely diverse, with composers like Schoenberg branching out into atonal, 12-tone and so on, and others rejecting that and still writing tonally. So the whole spectrum of composition has become much more individual. So I think that it has been important to me to find my own voice, and that's taken a few decades to do. So yes, it is an important aspect of my composition.
And that can change, I guess?
It can change gradually, yes. And I started to find my own voice, I think, around about the 30s, in my 30s. But that itself has evolved as time has gone on. And I'm still finding different ways of writing. Yeah.
Serialism and quasi-aleatoric techniques are specifically highlighted in your biography. Can you please speak a little bit more about the works in which these techniques were employed and how they were employed?
Well, I used serialism in my earlier days, before I really found my own voice. And it wasn't 12 tones serial. I was very fascinated by modal writing. Where I would invent a mode for a particular piece, but I treated that serially. I would order the notes like Schoenberg would have ordered the 12 tones, and used inversions and transpositions and retrograde and all that. But the transpositions were within the mode. So, for example, in the mode, if it's a major third, it might be transposed that, it might become a minor third. So the intervals changed, whereas in 12-tone technique, the intervals didn't change. So it was quite a significant change from the conventional serialism. And I also derived, like Boulez would do, a series of numbers from the actual note order and derived a rhythmic series. But I found that too limiting. You know, it was a technique, yes, which I have discarded in detail. But you know, some of my earlier pieces I still keep, and as we discuss later on. So yes, now that's the serial part of it. Later on, I discovered more aleatoric writing, which is a certain element of chance, and I call it quasi because I don't want to lose control over the ultimate sound. Like Lutoslawski, which I discovered he found this a technique of in his Germanician, but we can see it very much in his string quartet. When some pages he's got the 4 players in separate boxes. They might start off at a synchronous point, but then until the end of the box, they don't consider the other players or try to keep in time. But it always sounds like Lutoslawski's string quartet. It doesn't deviate from that. It gives them the freedom of rhythm, as he expresses himself, between the different players. But I was also attracted to a kind of box notation where I boxed in a sequence of notes to be played in any order, and I gave instructions to play, you know, how fast to play, the tempo, the dynamics, and so on. And that gives an impression of the sound, which is always similar throughout whatever the performance. I've only used that occasionally, but it was something that attracts me when it is required.
You have already mentioned the names of quite a few composers. Which composers would you say had a significant influence on your style and your own thinking in music?
I've always been interested in the music of Bartók and of Messiaen, 2 very different composers in fact, but they both have something very special within me. But coming from England, Britain was a very prominent composer at the time, and having sung a lot from the youth choir, even in the BBC Symphony Chorus, his vocal writing influenced the way that I set for voices in a big way. Yeah, what is now called postmodern music, I don't really like that particular term, but the music of Steve Reich and John Adams and so on, Arvo Pärt to a certain extent, where they simplified music, and it's not just about repetition, I think it's about simplicity. And that attracted me later on in my career, I suppose the 20s and 30s I discovered this. And but I've also been interested in Gorecki, in Schnittke, some of his work, not all of it, and also followed some of the music of Henri Dutilleux, which came available much later on. And they've all had some kind of influence, but I've never copied their technique. They've just fused different things. But I think what's been more of an influence is the indigenous music from different parts of the world. I have used Indian raga, for example, and I've used some of the pentatonic scales used in Japan and for the Balinese gamelan music and so on. So that has been incorporated into my style as well.
So it's not necessarily an influence, it's almost more a form of inspiration, really.
I suppose it is, yeah, I guess so, yes.
And were there any South African composers that inspired you?
I would say that in the early days when I was in the youth choir, we did sing a piece by Jean Hubert, who at that time I learned, you know, that he was a South African composer living in the UK, as it happens. And we sang a piece by him. And he got to know about this, and he decided to write us an operetta. So, you know, that was quite fascinating. I don't say he was a major interest on my direction, but it was certainly of interest to me, prominent interest to me at that time. On the radio, as Michael Blake and Kevin Follins was played before I moved to South Africa, but they didn't really make a significant influence. And even when I came here, I learnt of many South African names, which, you know, having heard their music, I'd already formulated my own style, and I don't really think it influenced me in any way. Okay. But what did influence me, what changed my direction since moving here, was more how to express certain South African or commentary on certain events, like when Nelson Mandela passed away. I wrote pieces around that. And also I was very attracted by the African rhythms, so just as I was using Indian Raga or Gamelan, I was using the African rhythms, and I wrote one piece in particular called Our Rainbow Nation, very much a South African theme, for the West Coast Youth Orchestra. And that was a kind of concerto in 3 movements, which used African marimbas and kalimbas as soloists, and also plenty of percussion, including djembas and so on. So there's a fusion between the South African idea, or the African idea generally, and Western music.
And I know that you became very involved with New Music South Africa, and obviously during that time you were also very involved with South African composers. What was your role at New Music South Africa?
Well, I came across them before in Indaba in Durban. The Indaba theme was called The Riot of Spring. And that was in celebration, and this was in 2013, so it was a celebration of 100 years of the riotous performance of The Riot of Spring. And they requested composers to write a piece on this theme. So I wrote a piece which was called Riot at the Champs-Élysées Theatre, 1913. Only a 2-minute piece. They were workshopped. There was about 5 or 6 different pieces workshopped, and 2 were chosen for performance at the end of the Indaba, and mine was included, thank heavens. And that kind of got me into the New Music SA scene. And I became a member of the board, then was invited on the board, and eventually I became the chairperson. I did actually resign from the board in 2019, but I have had a lot of, I'm very thankful to them for a lot of performances and Indabas. There was one in Bloemfontein, in Free State University, and I curated an Indaba in Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth. Had a few performances there. So yeah, and since then, even since resigning from the board, and I'm still talking to the person who's organising a new music festival. The International Music Festival is coming to South Africa later this year for the first time, and Lucas Lickety, who's organising it, is actually asking to include something of mine, even though the ISCM haven't chosen a work of mine. He still wants to include it in the festival, so I'm looking forward to that.
Of the nearly 60 works on your work list, about only 16 of them were composed before you moved to South Africa. Could you tell me what happened there?
I actually have over 150 works in my catalogue, if you see the full catalogue now. But in the UK, you struggle to keep a job going, and I was actually made redundant a couple of times, so that I had all those distractions. I had the distraction of bringing up a family and a few personal distractions that gave me very little time to write down the music that I wanted to write. I had many ideas, but it was very frustrating for me there because I just couldn't get the time to do what I wanted to do.
I see.
But I didn't have those distractions from since moving in 2007, and I was able not only to revise some of the early music, but also to write a lot more new music.
Your work, Plea for Concordance, has a peculiar title. Please tell me more about this work.
Okay, this was quite an important work for me. I went to a concert in the Grahamstown Festival one year and met a cellist called Polina Butikova, who was playing a cello and piano recital. And I approached her, and I think she played some new music at the time. And I said, would you be interested in some pieces? And she said, I've got a trio for 2 cellos and piano. Would you like to write something for that? I actually ended up writing 2 pieces, one short one that was performed in Potchefstroom, and this Plea for Concordance, which was actually performed eventually in Bloemfontein, Free State University there. And yes, it's a 3-movement work, and basically it is about resolving conflict. the three movements, I'll just read the titles. They are Family Concordance, National Reconciliation, and Global Fellowship. And a lot of them start off with a conflict. It's somewhere in the writing. But I use something which is very important to me, a theme, a very beautiful theme, I believe, I feel that, which I've called the theme of reconciliation. And that is varied throughout the three movements of this piece. So all the conflict is being resolved by this theme of reconciliation, which is a calming theme. There's a variation at the end of the first movement, second variation at the end of the second movement, and there are two more variations in a much more glorified way in the last movement, the Global Fellowship one. So yes, it was a very important piece. I've since transcribed it for viola and piano, because that's a viola, cello and piano, sorry, because I think that gives more scope for performance, because Bellina only performed it that one time. Hasn't been performed in that version, but the theme of reconciliation was so important to me that I included it in that piece that I mentioned earlier, in memory of Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop, towards reconciliation. Again, it's on the same theme, really, because his life was about reconciliation. So that piece was written for orchestra and violin solo. And I've taken that theme exactly as it was in the Plea for Concordance and just orchestrated it in exactly the same spot in the three movements. So, but the rest of the music is totally different because it relates much more to the Archbishop, as we know him.
Many of the works that you have mentioned up to now are all instrumental works, but you also have some choral works. And I was curious to know, do you write the words to the choral music yourself?
Occasionally. Even through my early days, I wrote the words for a couple of communion anthems, which I had hoped to get performed in Christian literature. I have written the piece Passing of an Icon for Nelson Mandela. I wrote, which is the closest I've ever done to a poem there about Mandela. And that was actually sung in the piece, because the second half of that piece is a song. The first half was describing the reaction of his death. Yes, okay, I use my own words as commentary for scriptural writing. So, for example, my cantata, Healing the Planet, it's about global change, climate change and so on. And I was looking for a spiritual solution, so I turned to the writings of the Baha'i Faith. And I wrote a commentary, so it kind of linked the scripture writings and helped people to understand and make it more dramatic, effectively. So it was a commentary. It wasn't poetry, it wasn't anything, measured from a literary point of view. And the same, I've done that with my oratorio, The Healing of the Planet, as well. It's a commentary on scripture. So that's where but I'd rather, in my songs and so on, I'd rather use conventional poems or scripture.
I found the instrumentation of some of your works very unconventional. For example, the 6 dance episodes that were written for oboe, guitar and piano. How do you decide on the instrumentation of your works?
Well, that particular work, this is an earlier work in fact, which was requested by a group of that combination, headed by a guitarist called Rosanne Grisier. And she was requesting, I belonged to a composer workshop in the UK at the time, and she was requesting composers to write for this particular group. And the challenge was to write a balance between the guitar and the piano, which can be, you can drown the guitar very easily with the piano writing. And I believe that I was successful there. She did perform, the group performed the piece quite a lot of times, including the prestigious hall in London, Wigmore Hall. So yes, it has been given an airing. But the disadvantage of writing for such an unusual combination is that one ensemble will plug it. Once they disband, which happened in this case, it doesn't get other performances. So it gets lost in a way. So, and like the piece for 2 cellos and piano, that also was unconventional. That's why I transcribed them both for viola, cello and piano, because it makes it more approachable for performers.
Please tell me more about your use of quotations by some religious leaders in your concerto for piano, duet and orchestra.
I think this is a very interesting work anyway, because I subtitle this, If Music Be the Food of Love, as everybody knows is a quote from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. And the whole work, 3 movements, are about love, spiritual love more than anything else. So I took as a heading for, a subtitle as it were, for each of the 3 movements, a quote from different faiths, really to show that they have a similar approach, that they're not different. In fact, there is only one faith. And excuse me, I'm going to have to read the actual quotes to give you an idea of where they come together. The first movement is headed by a Buddhist writing, the Dhammapada. Let one live in love, let one be adept in one's duties. Then joyfully one will see the end of sorrow. The second movement is taken from the second epistle of John in the New Testament. Do not love the world or what is in the world. If anyone does love the world, the love of the Father finds no place in him, because everything there is in the world, disorderly body desires, disordered desires of the eyes, pride and possession, is not from the Father, but is of the world. So that's just where people are distracted by following material love rather than spiritual love. Mm-hmm. And the third movement is from the Baha'i Faith. It is from what the scripture called the Hidden Word by Baha'u'llah. O friend, in the garden of thy heart plant naught but the rose of love, and from the nightingale of affection and desire loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous and eschew all fellowship with the ungodly.
Please tell me more about your oratorio, The Nine-Pointed Star.
That is massive work, the most important piece that I think I've ever written. On a massive scale, lasting 1 hour and 3/4. And what it does is to show what I touched on earlier, is that all religious faith is one. It comes from one source, all genuine religious faith. I mean, there are people who've gone off at a tangent and so on. And this has all come together with what I believe now to be the Baha'i faith, because it draws from all the previous religions, accepting them as being one. And I wanted to write a work that showed this. So I took 3 different aspects. That is the concept that there is one divine creator, one God, and that there is love, spiritual love from that creator, and that when our bodies die, our souls are able to, or some energy form is able to move on to another phase, another energy form effectively. So I took scriptures which showed that it is a progressive revelation from the early writings from Krishna, or with the sayings, because he never wrote it down. They were like Jesus' writings, they were actually written down years later. But from Krishna through to the Old Testament, I should say the Abraham and Moses, Zoroaster, right through the Buddha to Jesus, to Muhammad, and to the Baha'i faith. All of this is a progressive revelation of educators. Krishna was educated right up through to Baha'u'llah. And we have now got a much bigger picture, an understanding of spirituality. So the music itself is written for 5 solo voices, and they are soprano, mezzo, tenor, baritone and bass. There's a single 4-part choir and a medium-sized orchestra, but lots of percussion. It's in 4 different parts, taking the 3 different parts, taking 3 different phases of this development, this revelation, development of revelation. And each part is in 4 movements. And each part starts off with the same music, actually written for African djembas and a concert marimba. I had to use concert marimba, not African marimba, because I used to use notes that weren't on an African marimba, but it was giving that African sound at the start of each of the three parts.
Please tell me more about your recent works.
Okay, what I wanted to show, to say was that recently there has been a release of my piano music, and it includes a recent work, my third piano sonata. The recording uses my second sonata, a fairly recent piece called Reformation, and also a suite called Four Kinds of Love. And that was performed by a professor of piano, an American professor called Nancy Lee Harper. She's now living and recorded in Canada, and it's recorded by Toccata Classics, which is based in the UK. So it's quite worldwide, really. So that was volume 1. That was actually called volume 1, so that leaves room for volume 2. So Nancy asked me to write some more music for that volume, which won't be actually performed or recorded until possibly next year. So what I wrote there in 2022 was 19 images of the divine, which takes some of the high revelation of names and attributes of the divine creator, attributes which we humans should try and aspire to. They're quite challenging, like mercy, perfection, and names like that. And it's a piece called. It's a piece which lasts about an hour long, and I wrote another short piece called Spirit of Joy in 2022, which will be included, I hope, on there. And I might write a few more piano pieces to complete the CD. So that's a recent work, and that was a work that I've been having, like the oratorio, and the idea for quite a long time. And it's now become possible to write for a particular occasion, so I'm glad about that. Nancy also suggested that I write a concerto for piano, and that was a challenging idea, because there's a whole repertoire of really great piano works, and it was a high sort of canon to be included in, and some works for the piano concertos just don't seem to work, But I wanted to make something a little bit different. She did suggest that I didn't use a full orchestra, that I use maybe just strings and a few percussion. So that got my mind really working onto something different. My concerto, which I did write at the end of 2022, is in 4 movements, and it consists of an orchestra of 5 woodwind and 3 percussion players, so there's lots of percussion there, and plus the timpani, harp and celesta, and the strings. And it's a very colourful work, and I think it is quite different from any other concerto that's been written.
And has it been performed yet?
No, but she wanted to record it, and I'm hoping that will happen a year after, probably 2025. But a lot now depends. She tells me it's a lot dependent on funding, and being with an orchestra. I'm just praying that it will happen, because it really is an exciting work.
And are you currently working on any new compositions?
Nothing right now at present. I am working on my electronic keyboard to transcribe some of my orchestral writing, because orchestras are very reluctant to put on new music unless you are known, you're really well known. And I wanted to expose the orchestral music, because I do believe that I write well for orchestra. I've got a very it's like an artist using colour, and I will pick colours as I want them. I think that's how one should write for orchestra. And yes, I'd like these works, and I'll be planning to put them on a CD. I'm planning to put them on the internet and so on. But works for the future, who knows? I think you just have to watch this space.
Absolutely, and it's very evident that you are still very energetic and very busy with the music,
yes,
which is very commendable and exciting for me to see what else you are going to produce. I would love to listen to more of your work, and I know that a lot of your works are available on your website and on other channels as well. And I would like to thank you for your time. Tell me more about your music and about yourself. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.